said, my name is Nienke van der Werf. I'm a consultant at Spectral. I won't go into much detail what Spectral does and whatsoever. But I think what's good to keep in mind is that we're a software company. So that we only steer certain parts of the energy system, and I will go a bit into that later on. But I want you to keep that in mind. Thanks for having me. I wanted to tell you a little bit about how we can use communities towards a more resilient and efficient energy system. So maybe to start with, what is a decentralized resilient energy system? I think we can take hours to debate on the perfect definition of what it is. But for today, I wrote it down as an energy system which brings together demand and supply within a geographical area. So that means that energy which is produced is also consumed within like a neighborhood, for example, or something which is close together. And then since supply and demand are typically not at the same time, so as you can imagine, solar energy, of course, is produced throughout the day, whereas residents usually use energy at night. We have to connect those two as well. And that is something we expect we'll do is by adding a smart layer on top, which is basically an additional layer of information. We try to connect supply and demand in time as well. Then why is there a need for those resilient and decentralized energy systems? I think, as everyone here knows as well, is that we're within Europe, in the Netherlands, but also, I guess, in Ukraine before the war, the energy landscape is transitioning at a rapid pace. We used to have a few central power plants, usually fossil fuel based. And nowadays, with the integration of renewable energies, we're starting to move to a lot more production sites within the whole energy system. And following from that, our energy markets are also shifting from centralized energy markets to decentralized ones. I won't be going into much detail on that today, but it's good for you guys to know. And with this whole trend and basically transition happening, there's a desire for more transport capacity in the grid. So as you can imagine, if you have a very central system, as you can see in purple over here, there's only a couple of lines which need to be connected to the consumers and the producer. And on the right-hand side, you can see it start to look more like a network, which requires more lines to interconnect those different types of producers and consumers. And that is stressing our electricity grids to transport more capacity throughout the day. And in addition to that, a lot of residents and consumers are also starting to produce their own energy. And this requests the grid to also transport from the low voltage grid, so at a residential level, to the high voltage grid, where a lot more of interconnectivity between those two is required to make sure that we can also do that. And then as last, at the lowest level, we can see that a lot more people are both producing energy by PV panels, but are also have an increased demand for electricity, for example, by heating their homes in an electrical way or switching to electric vehicles. And this, well, is very short what is happening within our energy landscape, but this poses a lot of new challenges. So I think one of the very good things which is coming out of this is that by creating such a network, if for whatever reason a blackout is happening in a part of the system, the rest of the system is still able to operate freely. Whereas in the historic electricity grid, if one of the lines or one of the producers was attacked or not able to produce energy, everyone directly bears the consequences of that. Well, I think I'm I'm not really up to date on the Ukrainian situation. I think you guys know better. But I can imagine there are several issues here which also affect you. But in the Dutch case, we also have some issues. And I wanted to highlight that because that's my field of expertise. So what we mainly see is that our electricity grid is unable to transport all the electricity we want to. And that leads to some very interesting things happening. On the right hand, you see a map of the Netherlands. I zoomed in because it's a really small country, of course. This map shows the grid capacity in the Netherlands. All the red areas are areas where currently, if you would like to have more energy from the grid than you currently have, you're not able to get that. There are some rules which make assumptions for residents and small offices, but big industry, if you want to get a grid connection somewhere over here, you're not allowed to. You're not going to get it. You're put in the waiting list and you have to wait 5 to 10 years. All the orange areas are areas where it's still under investigation. If you might or might not get some grid capacity, and the yellow areas are a danger zone, so to say. And that brings me to the project I wanted to highlight today. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about Republica. That's part of a European subsidy project as well. It's called Atelier. I maybe can link the link to the website later if you would be interested. And Republica is based in our capital, Amsterdam, which is a red zone as well. And we tried to get a grid connection for this project. And the grid operator said, yeah, we're having trouble throughout winter days to actually provide the energy you're requesting. So we're going to limit the energy you can get during those times. So during winter days, we're only able to get 25% of the total energy we are requesting. And yeah, as you can imagine, that actually requires us to come up with new ideas how we're using our energy and how we're not using the grids to get our energy. Basically build a decentralized, resilient energy system. So that's why I wanted to highlight that today. So over here you can see what the buildings look like. A little bit of background. So this project consists out of 6 different buildings, which maintain apartments, office, and hotel. There's charging points for electric vehicles. There's some solar panels on the roof. So 260 kilowatt peaks. That's approximately 700 to 800 solar panels. There's a pool and there's 2 restaurants. And this is, for the Dutch law, a very special case because all those buildings share one connection to the main electricity grid. That's usually not allowed, but because of the subsidy project, it is allowed. That is also very dependent on the Netherlands. So in Ukraine, it might be entirely different in that sense. But this one grid connection, as I told you guys, is limited during the winter days. And that required us to come up with ideas how to make sure that the residents living there and the hotel and everyone inside is not feeling the effects of this limitation. And we do that by adding flexibility to our system. And the first way we're doing that is by shifting demand or steering supply in order to bring those 2 closer together. So for example, I think an electric vehicle is a very good showcase for this. We're only charging the electric vehicles at the plugs when the sun is shining and our solar panels are producing energy. If not, they're not charged, or we're waiting until the grid is able to provide us with enough energy. And then something else which we included, I told you guys before that usually supply and demand are not at the same time in the day. So we're using a battery basically to create a buffer for supply and demand to better meet. And we're steering those assets to make sure that everyone's happy, basically. And so that's all great. But then what are the advantages for the residents and the owners of the hotels and the offices? Well, first of all, we actually enable the consumers over there to use locally produced energy. And I think this also boils down to the thing I already told you, that this actually reduces the dependency on the grid. So if, for example, we were to be cut off of the grid at one point for whatever reason, we would still have a share of our electricity which we are locally producing, and therefore can also use ourselves. And if you look at it from that perspective as well, we're also less dependent on energy prices, which after the start of the war, they have been going crazy. We don't want to be dependent on Russian gas anymore. And this has really caused the energy prices to grow exponentially. If you can use a bigger share, which you have produced yourself, and you know the value of that, which is relatively cheap, you are also reducing the amount of money you have to pay for energy in the end anyway. So that is both financially interesting, but it's also, I think, from an ethical perspective, nice that you know you're not using fossil fuels or Russian gas, for example. And that this is more like on the technical side of things. From a social perspective, we're also really engaging our consumers at the site to participate in the decision-making process. So I told you about the electric vehicles. Well, I can say that people are not allowed to charge their electric vehicles at certain times of the day. But of course, I'm not living there. So we're also actively trying to engage them in this process and give their opinion on certain things. Like, would you rather pay more for your energy, but make sure we have that energy for your electric vehicle? Or are you also okay with charging it at a later time? And those are all things we're trying to get their opinion on as well. And I think in the end, that helps also with the community building within this energy community, to get a sense of fulfillment and belonging amongst everyone who's living there. And that brings me to my last slides. What were the main obstacles in this whole process? Well, let's hope it's not happening again, but we had a lot of delays due to COVID. I think, that's familiar for everyone. And also the Dutch rules and regulations, but also some of the European laws they're not making it easy for us to integrate this. So that's something which you might have to keep in mind as well, because it's very specific to each country. That can be a big barrier into implementing this stuff. And then at last, we had a lot of we're having issues with building a community, since those people are not already living there. How are we going to engage them while they're not living there? Make sure they help us up front while they're also moving and having a lot of stuff to think about. So that's something you also have to think about, how you're really going to engage people to be an active part of this. And I think the European Commission really summarized that well on their website. And that is that energy communities offer a means to restructure our energy system by harnessing energy. So that's that locally produced energy part, and allowing citizens to participate actively in the energy transition and thereby enjoy greater benefits. We already discussed those benefits, but I wanted you guys to have this final word as well. And I think that's it from my side.